The chimney top, that's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, the dream that you did to go wide, oh, why can't I, oh, someday wish upon a star, wake up with the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops, high above the chimney top, that's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. The dream that you did to why, oh, why can't
I'm going to pause screen sharing for a moment to resend the confirmation email to a few people. So just give me one moment, please.
I'm just going to pause to stop the recording if that's fine, because we can always start once we start again. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first water workshop in the series that we have. This is entitled Water is Your Life, What's in Your Water? So hopefully you're here to learn more about water and equity, how it relates to us as a whole, and learn some very important information. This is a 4-part series. This will be, as I mentioned, the first of that, and so they're quarterly. So we can expect to have our next one at the top of next year. And so with that, we will go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. And so we have probably about an hour or so that we'll be spending together going over the content material. And so as you can see the agenda here, we'll briefly just go over our EJ program, or BWW as a whole for our organization. I know some of you are quite familiar with us. You work closely with us, and so it'll just be, an overview for most of what you already know about us. Then we'll go on into the content for this evening's presentation, which will cover the global and US infrastructures of water systems, also some of the water concerns. And this will be a great discussion to be able to bring together any questions that you may have, and also give a high level, like in terms of, some of the contaminants or pollutants that you may find in water, what to do if you suspect that you have any, concerns with your water, and so forth. And then leave some time for conversation, closing out, and what's next to come, as we mentioned in the further review of the series. So that is what we'll have for this evening. And just sharing a little bit about us. Or next slide. And so as you can see here, BWW has been around for about 25 years. And so we are a nonprofit organization that is rooted in the community. We are all about health and well-being of Black women and girls. And so we do that through health education, empowerment, and advocacy. And so here for tonight, we'll be, uplifting for water equity. And in terms of the EJ program, which I don't know if we have a separate slide for that. Well, we do have definitions for what EJ is and RJ, but just to let you know, for our environmental justice program, we have two, sides of the hat here. We have one, which is the built environment, which will find more of our programming around, the built environment as it relates to water, which we'll be discussing tonight. Also, we are very active in terms of our partnership or involvement with STAN, which is a coalition in Los Angeles that, focuses on phasing out the oil drilling. As we know, that is a huge concern for communities across Los Angeles in terms of, oil drilling and how it relates to our overall health and well-being, and also reproductive justice as well. And then on the other side of the hat, we have our occupational hazards and personal care protections. And so that's largely around looking at some of the chemicals and toxins that are in the products that we use, whether that be hair care or personal care products. And then also looking at our hairstylist community and occupational hazards in the work that they do. Here you will see on the right side array of programs that we offer through our organization. We are deeply rooted in reproductive justice, and so you can see that listed here, as well as comprised of various other programs such as sexual health education with the Get Smart Before You Get Sexy. Also, it's a newer program is the Grown and Sexy, which relates to more mature audience in terms of healthy and sexual education and relation in regards to that. Also, we have a maternal health programming, Sisters at 8, which is more civic engagement. It has a variety of different topics that we look at on a monthly basis. And as we go into electoral season, we'll be, having a discussion about that for our Sisters at 8, and then health education broadly with our Kitchen Divas, food distribution that we do bi-monthly. And so that is a great opportunity to be able to, fellowship with the community, but also be able to provide healthy and nutritious produce to our community at large. And voting rules me, our green program, voting rules, everything around me, as well as our DPP program that we are doing in partnership right now with our Stockton office. And this is about diabetes prevention. And then on our C4 side, we have our BWW Action Project that has more political activism and allows us more opportunities to engage in more advocacy, and as we have here, our environmental justice. So next slide, please. And so this slide here, we want to go over just to lay some groundwork in terms of some of the key principles. And so environmental justice, sometimes people may be new to what this is, or you may be familiar, but we wanted to just break it down just a little bit further. And so as you can see here, EPA defines, or how it's defined by the EPA in terms of environmental justice. It's about ensuring that all people, regardless of what they look like and who they are or where they choose to live, whether it be, geographically, in certain zip codes, throughout the communities, and where they have an equal access and ability to live in a safe community. And so as you see here, fair treatment around the involvement for all people, communities, origins, to be able to, live in a safe and healthy environment that's free from enforcement of, environmental laws, regulations, and policies that may be, what is the word I want to say, prohibited in terms of their overall health and well-being in here. So we'll go into the next slide. And so this was taken from the U.S. Water Alliance, and it defines water equity. And so also this is something we want to be able to define further. And so with this, excuse me, it has the premise behind it where you have access to safe and clean and affordable drinking water. So that is a human right. We should all know. And so regardless of where you live and, your social economic, status, you should have equal access to clean and healthy water and water services or water systems. And so sharing the economic and social environmental benefits of water systems, and then also are reliant in the face of floods, drought, and other climate risks. And so that's the definition for water equity. And if we look overall for what is the intersections between EJ and RJ framework, as I mentioned earlier, we are deeply rooted in the reproductive justice framework as our organization was founded, but the newer premise is the environmental justice. And so with that, there are huge overlaps for that. And so here just wanted to know a few of those. And so with the RJ framework, it says that all individuals have a right to have or bear a child. And then secondly, also the choice if you choose not to do so. And then as highlighted here, think is having equal rights for parent and children to live in a safe and healthy environment with conditions or safe and healthy conditions, I should say, regardless of whether it's your age, your race, your gender, sexual orientation, immigration status, ability, or economic conditions. And so this should not play or have any dealings on whether or not, you should be in an environment and how it affects, how you live in an environment. And then lastly, the right to bodily autonomy. And so this is the framework we always like to lead in and how it interacts with environmental justice as well. And so here, as you can see, this is our team. So I lead up the team as the environmental justice manager, and we have our program lead, Tiana Shaw-Wakeman, which will also be co-facilitating for this evening's presentation tonight. And I think I went into just a little bit ago about the two different facets that we have as it's broken down here between the built environment and our beauty justice initiatives. And so water equity fits within the built environment, as well as our work, as I mentioned earlier, with Stand LA, which is one of the coalition that looks to stop neighborhood oil drilling. And then also we're getting into the space for plastics pollutions as well. And then beauty justice, as I mentioned, looking at toxins and chemicals, and notably in the products that we use, whether that be hair care or personal care products. We do that through our research that we conduct with Taking Stock. Also Empowerment, which is our Curls and Conversation, which is a quarterly workshop series that we have, which we engage with our audience, talking about all things about hair care and how we can style our hair confidently and safely. And then advocacy, we also partner with organizations to be able to advocate for safer regulations and policies around the beauty industry. So before we get started into the main content for this evening, we just wanted to poll the group and poll you here. We have two questions, and so we'll be getting into those. So the first one is here, if you want to select your response. And so the first one is related to your water utility, and then the second you can answer in regards to how much you agree or disagree with the statement on I am concerned with my water quality.
Thank you. And it should, I see people answering. So I did launch it already. So people should have the screen in front of them labeled intro. And there's two questions, both with different answer options. You can add those. And we'll just give it maybe a full minute, only been about 40 seconds for people to answer. Thank you. And just briefly, the reason we ask is that in LA County, there are, a lot of people think of LEDWP if you have LEDWP, and while LEDWP does service about 4 million people, the other 6 million people are serviced from one of, I believe it's between 205 and 210 utilities. So there are a lot of utilities in LA, a lot of smaller utilities, though LEDWP is the largest. And we will talk a little bit more about LEDWP specifically and some of their water quality. Okay, just give it a couple more seconds if anyone else wants to answer. Okay, well, Sounds good. Looks like we have some LADWP folks in the room. That is helpful as moving forward. So I ended the poll. Okay, we can move on. So I'm going to switch so that Astrid will share screen while I am facilitating. Thank you so much, Astrid, for laying the groundwork. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you all see?
Okay. Okay, so first off, my name is Tiana. Thank you, Astrid, for the introduction. I know we are a smaller group tonight, but that is okay. We will continue on as usual. And this is being recorded and live streamed, so more people are seeing it, and we will also have it for the future. And then we're also going to be having more workshops. So this is just to get us started. So thank you so much for the individuals who were able to join us. So if you go to the next slide, please, Astrid. So the first, we're going to do a true false to start. So the first question is true or false. Billions of people in the world do not have access to managed water services. So you can put in the chat if you think for the first one, it's true or false. Does anyone have any guesses for that one? And then the second one is the Flint, Michigan water crisis and the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis both happened by accident. Do people think that is true or that is false? We'll just give it a couple seconds for people to respond in the chat with your opinion. Okay, I see a few private responses, which is okay. Okay. Yep. Okay, got it. Cool. Well, the answer, next slide, please. Thank you. So the answer to the first question is true, that billions of people in the world do not have access to managed water services. And the answer to the second question is false, that those accidents actually did not happen by accident, that they were examples of systemic racism and examples of water infrastructure that had intentionally been left to ruin, so to speak. So we will get more into that. Next slide, please, Astrid. So we're going to start off by thinking kind of globally, and then we'll slowly narrow into South Los Angeles. So globally, 2.2 billion people lack access to safely managed drinking water services, which is about a quarter of the world's population, about. Also, 90% of natural disasters are weather related, including floods and droughts. And this is relevant because as we've seen, and as we do see, even with what's happening right now in Nigeria, what happened in Jackson, Mississippi, with what happens that a lot of times these natural disasters have a really strong influence on our water quality and our water infrastructure. And then over half of the global population, or 4.2 billion people, lack safely managed sanitation services. So meaning that whereas here and in some countries, we're used to being able to honestly flush a toilet, go to the bathroom, do what we need to do, and for those to be treated and managed decently well. In a lot of places, that's not the case. And even in some places in the US, that's not the case, where there can be some contamination worries related to sewer systems, septic systems, and sanitation management, and then individuals in their lives and other like drinking water and irrigation water services. So that's like thinking broadly. Next slide, please. So just to kind of get into, what's been happening in the world, to more relevant details about the water situations. So just today, I was looking up as I was, putting the final touches on the presentation and reading about how in Nigeria, because of the flood, individuals are being forced to use flood water despite concerns of bacteria and disease in the water. So people are cooking, cleaning, using the bathroom in the same flood water that has its own contaminants. Next slide, please. And then even thinking more locally and in the past couple years or the past decade, so to speak, we can see that there's been a lot of news around the infrastructure in the US breaking down, not being what it should be, or not being managed correctly, or being intentionally disinvested in certain communities, like what happened in Flint, Michigan, like what happened in Jackson, Mississippi, and like what's happened in some places in California. So in Flint, Michigan, part of it was long-term disinvestment, but after the recession, there was a decision made to try to make the things cheaper to cut costs in Flint by diverting water from Detroit's system or Detroit access point, which had safer, cleaner water, to the Flint River, which institutions had been dumping sewage and waste and different things. And then this kind of was, in some ways, they say the straw that broke the camel's back, that led to kind of the big news outbreak, and a lot of individuals, a lot of children being overly exposed to lead, but also to other things, a lot of diseases and things like that. And same with Jackson, Mississippi, or a similar story with Jackson, Mississippi, a predominantly Black, 80% Black community in Mississippi, that after, in like the after Brown v. Board of Education, and after schools were forced to desegregate, a lot of white families, white flight, left, and took a lot of their tax base with them and a lot of their privilege. And since then, the community, Jackson, Mississippi, and specifically the water systems, have been heavily disinvested in. And so there have been, the mayor of Jackson and other individuals had been advocating to help fix the systems and upgrade the systems for years, and had been neglected by the Mississippi legislature. So what happened most recently, and what was in the news, was that there was a large storm, and that large storm affected the water system, and then individuals were under a boil notice. Individuals didn't have safe access to clean water. And again, these two stories are like the larger stories, the stories that get told now. And even though they're being told, they're not always being told with that systemic analysis, but there are a lot of other systems that are also facing crisis and that are also in need of support. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today, the American Society of Civil Engineers has given the U.S. water infrastructure a C grade, so saying that the entire U.S. water infrastructure needs a lot of investment. And the American Water Works Association said that the infrastructure needs about $1.7 trillion of investment in order to get back to where it should. And then systems are worse in places that are already disinvested in other ways. So there are a lot of systemic issues around this. So I mentioned disinvestment a few times, or certain communities not having the political power or having the access to resources to be able to invest in infrastructure. Then there's systemic racism, which is those communities are largely Black, brown, and lower income. Then also water management these days is more expensive than it used to be. And there's also different considerations, like where you can get water from, reliability of certain water sources, and then also disaster preparedness. So sometimes poor disaster preparedness, sometimes not having resources to actually be able to do that disaster preparedness. And then this is all made worse because there are some very vulnerable populations that are more so affected by all of these things. So the children and elderly, specifically children as it relates to developmental issues like that can be had from lead in water, pregnant individuals, those who are immunocompromised, and then those who have the cumulative impacts. So using lead as an example, again, if we think about if you have a worry of lead being in drinking water, and you also might have a worry about lead paint or lead being used on toys, then for that same child, now instead of one source for lead contamination, now there's multiple sources. So it's also difficult when individuals have all these cumulative things that are affecting them. And in Los Angeles, we have many cumulative things that are affecting us, whether it's highways and air pollution, as well as living near a refinery or whatever it might be. And so also thinking big picture and holistically, those can affect as well. Next slide, please. So that's just like a brief kind of global and kind of US-based look at water systems. And now we're going to delve into South Los Angeles. And we want to start off by asking anyone what your experiences are, if you have any experiences with your water system or your water utility where you live that you'd be interested in sharing, because we do want to this is a workshop, so the entire second half of the presentation after this next bit will be conversation and us being able to provide whatever support we can about your water quality. So does anyone have any comments or anything you'd like to share about your water experience?
If I can, I just want to share that I know where I live, the water is really, really, I don't know, I can't explain, like harsh, and leaves like a white ring, around the pots or whatnot that we use, that I have to use vinegar to get the stains out my pots. And I invested in this, it's this little tester where you can test if the pH and stuff in your water, because I recently started and I won't be long, recently ordered Mountain Valley spring water because I understand it's supposed to be the best water. And it really doesn't even taste like Mountain Valley spring water. So I just think overall we have an issue with just water in general, period. Aside of it, not knowing if it's the best or not. And on top of that, the cost in which to just have fresh drinking water is just expensive.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it sounds like you might be talking about water hardness, which is a scale of, I think it is actually like a 1 to something scale of how, and it's based off of like the mineral content in water. And I know where I grew up in the South, and I know I used to have the water's very soft, and so I used to have those things where I would wash hands and you couldn't tell if your hands were clean or not because it was slippery because the water was really soft. And here it's the opposite, where it feels very hard and stiff, kind of what you're saying. So you said you bought a filter. May I ask what kind of filter and if it's helping?
No, I didn't buy a filter. I actually just threw a side note in there about this tester that I use in terms of pH, because I know how important it is for us to have, a balanced pH drinking water.
Okay.
Got it. And I think you were also saying that you got mountain spring water. Is that something that you purchased like as a?
It was a recommended water to get, but truth be told, there's really no difference in terms of taste or versus other drinking water. So I don't know.
We will be talking about towards the latter part of it, like bottled water or vended water, and so that can be something that we can shed some more light on as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So I guess just one more clarifying question. So would you prefer your water to be softer, or what changes would you like to see in your water?
I want my water to be soft water too. And I know what you mean by soft water, because when I visit my family, back east or whatever, and I'll take a shower there, oh my God, it's just so different. To be truthfully, I don't even have to use as much lotion, just to be honest. You come back here in the States and the water is absolutely horrible. I mean, it's just really horrible. Yeah, it's horrible. And a long time ago when I was a kid, I used to be able to drink out of a water hose. It was the most fresh tasting water I've ever had. I would not recommend anybody drinking out of a water hose now because I just don't know, right? I just don't know. And then I had the awesome honor of whitewater rafting in New Zealand, where we were able to drink the water, right, straight from, where we were river rafting. And I have never in my life had the most purest, cleanest, refreshing water in my absolute life. Far cry different than what we're getting in the US. So I know that our water quality is not as good as the water quality that I had in New Zealand.
Oh yes, especially living in an urban environment like LA. Definitely lots of
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does sound incredible. Oh, that sounds wonderful. So I think that actually moves us very well onto our next one. So the next slide is where our water comes from matters. So very good segue. Oh, just one back, Astrid, if you could go one back. There, that's perfect. So where water comes from matters, to your point. The sourcing of drinking water influences the quality of the water that you're drinking, how far it has to travel, what it's traveling in to get to you, where it's stored, how long it's stored. All of these things affect the water quality. And in Southeast Los Angeles, 65% of our drinking water has to be imported from sources located outside of South Los Angeles. And because of various factors, different utilities have to spend a lot of time thinking about where can we get water from, what's reliable, what's less reliable, and having to make those decisions about where we get water from. It's like, next slide, please. So for this slide, we can see that on the left-hand side, it's a little bit small, but on the left-hand slide, it shows percentage of service population. This is lower income households. And on the right-hand slide, you can see households that or community water systems that rely on some amount of groundwater that have some amount of contamination. So you can see that they link up. So the areas that are lower income and that do rely on some amount of groundwater might also be having groundwater systems or water systems that have contamination in some way, shape, or form. Next slide, please. So in terms of water infrastructure management, this is a very dense slide, but the most important things from it are that so systems that have 15 or more connections are subject to the State Water Board, and the board implements Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So it implements standards that say how much of certain contaminants can be allowed or admissible, if any can't be allowed or admissible. So they govern that. And one important thing is that the size of community water systems matters. So larger utilities have a larger service area, and which means that they can have more profit, and which means they can reinvest those things in upgrades, maintenance, and help and expertise. And so it can also impact access to resources, technology, and personnel, all of which can affect your water quality, pricing, and service. Next slide, please. Next slide, if you can, Astrid. Oh. Thank you. So much of the area, this is again, South Los Angeles. So much of the area in South Los Angeles operates on smaller investor-owned systems, which can lead to higher concentration of systems operating with contaminated violations because they might not have the same accesses to resources and many other criteria. Next slide, please. Sorry, Astrid, I see you on the phone. Thank you. So the high level takeaways from this portion of the South Los Angeles element is that where water comes from matters, how far it has to travel to get to us, and even climate change has an effect on the current times. And one of the things when we talk about like smaller systems versus larger systems is that when a water system has the ability to has the profits, the resources to be nimble and change with time. So if in one season there is more water and because of snowpack and water melt, if in another season it's been hotter, so some groundwater systems, water is evaporating off. So when a system has more ability to be more nimble and to invest in those kinds of things, then that system has a better ability to handle contaminants and to handle any sort of stressors to a system like disasters or anything else that might come up. Next is that South Los Angeles does have many smaller systems that might not have access to those resources. And then lastly, that a lot of this inequity is concentrated in BIPOC and low-income communities. And though we're talking about South Los Angeles, it's also true that these are often concentrated in rural areas as well, though we are talking about urban areas today. Next slide, please. So what's in your water? How can it affect health? So next slide, please. So it's first thing you want to be clear is that it is reasonable to question our water. It is reasonable to wonder. It is reasonable to inquire. Part of that is kind of thinking largely systemically that their communities of color have been the target of policies that negatively affect our health for a very long time. Our other portion of our campaign, Toxic Chemicals and Beauty Care Products, is all about how regulatory systems have not met the needs of consumers and how industry and others can take advantage of that and harm our health. And so when it comes to water, it's also true that it is perfectly okay to be curious. And it's especially true if you do see visual tap water quality issues. If you see that it smells like odd, it looks odd, if it's brown and it shouldn't be, if you feel like you lack proper utility services, if your charges are fluctuating constantly, it is very reasonable to question. And I think that's important because I know sometimes it feels like, should I really be questioning this thing? But I think the first thing I want to start with is it is reasonable to ask these questions and to inquire, and we're here to help as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of some things that could be in water systems, just some high level things that could be in water systems. So lead is one that is talked about a lot, and it's important because lead in drinking water can come from both old pipes. It can come from some of the solder used in pipe connections. Though it's a naturally occurring metal, it's toxic to the human body in any concentration, and it accumulates, and it's particularly toxic for children going through development. Next slide, please. Nitrates are one that are being talked about a lot in California because nitrates can be very common and used in fertilizers and agricultural purposes. And since California is such an agricultural state, then those things can leak into groundwater and can leak into our systems. So it is more common in rural areas, but because of some potential health impacts from nitrates in water, particularly for children, again, one syndrome is called blue baby syndrome, which is there's an oxygenation issue. Then it is important that this nitrates are also not found in our water, but can be a potential contaminant. Next. So PFAS, I think, are getting a lot of, I think, recognition these days, understandably, because PFAS are known as forever chemicals and they're kind of considered a contaminant of emerging concern. They're often used in firefighting foams, flame retardants, household cleaners, and polishes. They can also be found in clothing and just many, many products. Many things that we come across can have PFAS in them, including water systems. So different studies have found PFAS in decent concentrations in many bodies, and it can have different health impacts, developmental, immune system, reproductive system, so something to be aware of. Next. Microplastics. So microplastics are also considered a contaminant of emerging concern. They can come from food packaging and from water bottles and from many other places. So we'll get into kind of plastic bottles and things later, but it's just another thing to be aware of. Next slide, please. So for anyone using LADWP system, EWG, the Environmental Working Group, did kind of a separate outside party analysis and found that for the last quarter assessed by the US EPA, January 2021 to March 2021, tap water provided by this water utility was in compliance with federal health-based drinking water standards. So if you are serviced by LADWP, that is good news that LADWP, both internally, their reports say this, and then externally, the reports say this. However, it is important to remember that a lot of the federal requirements have not been updated in a long time or to meet the needs of a changing environmental landscape or a changing landscape. So while it is important for institutions and for your utility to meet those guidelines, those requirements are old. So in some ways they are kind of the bare minimum. And also while the LADWP and a lot of the work that LADWP does is related to pipes, like servicing pipes. They're not necessarily related to premise plumbing. So plumbing or things that can happen on the premise of your home. So if there is a water quality concern, it could be from the water, it could be the fault of a water utility, or it could be internal, your house pipes, or it could be a combination of both or neither. So while the study has been good that it does say the water utility is in compliance, those requirements are old, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the water that is coming out of your tap, if you have LADWP, will match, all of those same studies based off of other factors that are important to consider. So if you do have LADWP, they do have a water quality page. So you can call to inquire about your water quality. And they have different options. And they're also, I added as well, the EWG study that talks about LADWP tap water. Sorry, so many acronyms, Environmental Working Group, and then Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So that kind of just an overall about them is to be aware that they do meet the federal requirements, which is really good. But if you are still worried about your water concerns, then you can have some valid questions because that might not tell the whole story. Next slide, please. So high-level takeaways from this section is that it is reasonable to question your water if you see a valid concern, and that there are things you can do and things to look out for and to be aware of, like the contaminants we mentioned. And there are health impacts related to certain chemicals in our water. And then I'll also add that if you do have LADWP and you do have water concerns, there is a phone number you can call and there's a website you can go to. And there have been external studies done on the water that you can look into as well. Next slide. So then that goes to what can you do? So next slide, please. So the first thing is to be aware that California passed AB 685 in 2012 that declared everyone's human right to water. So it is hereby declared that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water adequate for human consumption. So you have a right to safe, clean water. You have that right as a California resident and as a human being as well. Next slide. So, but still, what can you do? So there's kind of, how I visualize it, kind of three pools: is sort of understanding your tap water quality, because we talked about it can be many sources. Then there's addressing a concern. And then there's kind of understanding and addressing the affordability element as well, which is super important. So for tap water quality, one thing you can do is to review and request a water quality report. Every utility is required to put out a water quality report annually. So you can call and request, or if your utility does have a website, then you can also often find it there, but also call and request. Next is you can use this EWG tool, environmental working group tool, which I'll post in the chat. This allows you to like put in your zip code, and it should show you what utility you use. And then it should, if they've done a study on it, then it can show you maybe some contaminants they've found. So if you do have LEDWP, I actually checked because that's the utility I have, and it shows you some things to be aware of. Next, if neither of those things is satisfying, understandably, if you have a really high water quality concern, some utilities do free water testing, so you can call your utility and ask. If they don't, there are other labs to call, and you can make that inquiry as well to actually get your water tested. And then lastly, and very importantly, is to document and report concerns. So to document, write down, as well as to kind of fill a little bottle up of water that you notice might be miscolored or smell bad or you have a concern about. And for reporting, you can report to your utility. I would say a number is usually on a water utility bill. If the utility doesn't respond, then you can report directly to Cal EPA, the California Environmental Protection Agency. And then if that still doesn't work, then you can report directly to your elected representative. So we document and report. So then in general, it's requesting or reviewing a water quality report. You can try the EWG tool for more information, getting your water tested, and check with your utility to see if they would cover it, if they have a program for that, and documenting and reporting concerns to your utility, Cal EPA, and or your elected representative, depending on the severity of the issue. For addressing your concerns, it really is about the water issue and the root cause. But in the short term, you can, once you see your water quality report or check out the issue or have more of an understanding, we do recommend purchasing a water filter that addresses your concern. So if your biggest concern is microplastics or nitrates, you can check on different filters websites, and they will give you a list of what it filters and try to make sure that they match, because not every filter filters for the same things or has the highest strength. Or if you are not sure, then you can just try to buy a higher quality water filter that filters for most items, as addressing the long-term issues. And then lastly, understanding and addressing water affordability. So there are many utilities that have assistance programs. I added the LEDWP number in here because I know that, again, most people do have LED, or at least 4 million people have LEDWP in LA County. But if that is not your utility, then you can also call yours and ask about their assistance. And I'm going to post in the chat the LEDWP water assistance website as well. But in general, these are super high level, because the next 3 workshops that we have are going to be mostly focused on this slide. So mostly focused on helping everyone understand your water quality, address it, and also things related to affordability. And I want to kind of, for this slide, end on the fact that this isn't anything you should have to do. Back to the previous slide, you have a right to safe and clean water, so you shouldn't have to go through all of these steps. It is unfortunate that not everyone in the world has access to safe water, safe, clean water. But in the meantime, these are some things you could do to protect yourself and your family. Next slide. So just very, very briefly about bottled water. We do actually recommend against using bottled water because it's far more expensive than tap water, than other water solutions. There are chemical issues in plastic bottles. We mentioned microplastics. In fact, there was a recent study found microplastics in breast milk, so that's becoming a bigger issue. There are chemicals like BPA and BPS, which replaced BPA, that can be found, so that's another one. And then lastly, that it's not 100% that the water that you can buy in a bottle is cleaner than the water from your tap, because the water that you can buy in a bottle is regulated by a different standard board than the water from your tap. So the water you can buy in a bottle is regulated by the FDA, whereas the water that comes out of your tap is regulated by the EPA, and the EPA has stronger standards. That doesn't necessarily mean that one isn't cleaner than the other, because again, if your water system has a lot of contaminants or issues, then that bottled water might be cleaner. But it's just to say that in general, we don't recommend it as like a definite solution long-term. Next slide. Conversations and closing, and I'll turn it back over to Astrid for the last 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Tiana. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing. So this last portion of the discussion or workshop, we wanted to open it up for conversation to be able to talk more intimately about any concerns that you may have or questions that came up along the way in the previous sections that we talked about. I know we talked about some of the contaminants that are in there that may be of question and concern, as well as the different types of systems that service your area that you are. So this will give us the opportunity to be able to engage and be able, hopefully, answer some of those questions, but also if we don't have the specific answers, we will be more than happy to research those to find that and be able to get back to you, what are some of the answers to your concerns are. So, next slide.
I just want to make sure that the water that I am drinking is not going to cause any medical issues along, later on in life down the line. I think we deserve to have clean, healthy, water, because it's not just grown people that are using it, it's the infants, the mothers that are mixing infant formulas with water, et cetera, et cetera. So, just concerned that, the waters that are on the markets, the waters that we're getting, I think there should just be an automatic report on what's in the waters, not necessarily having to, go dig, to see what's in them.
Mhm. Yes, and so as we mentioned, I think Tiana started off with the water report. So for your specific utility, and I don't know if it was DWP, if you on the poll question, if you were the one.
It's Golden State water.
Oh, okay. So yeah, and that's probably falls under independent utility system. But by law, nonetheless, they should be able to have a water quality report that you can either go on the website or either, contact them directly to be able to see what is in the water, and also maybe be able to, raise those concerns if you do have specific issues with that. Because yes, we should not be, left to bear the burden if we do have, issues with our water system. That would be the first place I would recommend to start, would be to discuss with your, public utility system to entertain, what questions that you may have in regards to that. But again, yeah, it's sad that we live in the state that we, have to question, what's in our water. I know in polling over the summer, there were a lot of responses that related to, their water system. And so we hope to be able to publish a full report of some of those responses in there, and also to provide some resources for the community as well. And in the couple of slides that Tiana shared, I know you're not under the LADWP, but, contacting your water system directly to be able to, provide additional support. Next slide. And I think this is just, yeah, well, we have you, Monique, but we were just going to have a larger, discussion about, any concerns that came up along the way through this presentation. Again, this is just the first of, 4-part series. We'll be getting into more detail in the next few workshops that we have to be able to talk about the water quality and address any of those concerns. We do have 3 poll questions, in our time, but again, wanting to still honor the time here and answer any other questions that you may have, if you have any additional questions.
I think all of it's relevant and all of it's important, and I look forward to attending all of the future workshops.
Great.
Thank you. I can show you the tap water tool if you like to see what it looks like. Would that be helpful? I do think it is cool.
Yes.
Sure. Let me do that. Okay, I'm going to share screen. So this is the tap water tool, ewg.org/ oof, they give you a lot of pop-ups. ewg.org. Oh, can everyone see? Good.
Yes, we can see it. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yes. So this is the tap water tool. So I'm going to put in a local zip code.
Oh, you can put it in
near you.
ours.
Oh, yeah. That
Yeah.
office?
Yes. Mhm.
So it says featured utility is LADWP, talks what people served via utility. And then it shows you EWG's drinking water quality report shows results of tests conducted by the water utility and provided by the working group. And then it mentions the federal standards. It does say that they found 9 contaminants that exceed the EWG guidelines. And it does explain that legal does not necessarily mean safe. Getting a passing grade from the federal government does not mean the water meets the latest health guidelines or that the water coming out of your tap specifically does. And then it talks about those here. So at the bottom, it talks about how arsenic was one of them. And it tells you the exact, what the utility found, the parts per billion versus what the EWG's guideline is, and then what the legal limit is. And then it talks about all of the other ones that it found. So for your zip code, Monique, you can do the same. And then hopefully it might have some information. I don't know if every utility it would be covered, but hopefully you could get some clarity there. And it is helpful because it's third party too, which I think is nice.
And since we have
Thanks.
this intimate, discussion here, I don't know if it might be helpful to go to if we can Google, you were saying Golden State water system
Yeah, we can.
Golden State Water. Mhm.
or Golden State water.
We can probably end Facebook streaming and recording now. And then, yeah, happy to help and do any research now. We can.